Hello, welcome to Vine Chat with Ciao St. Louis. I'm Maxwell. This is a show where we interview winery principals and various media people over wine and just generally have fun. Today we are with Tim Puchta of Adam Puchta Winery, the oldest family winery in the United States. You started in what, 1855?
1855.
1855. Timmy, how did your ancestors, so how many generations have had the property, out of curiosity?
I'm the 6th generation, and then I have my son and 2 sons that are 7. So, well, yeah, there's 7 generations on the property.
Wow. And that's more of a rare thing nowadays. I mean, the family business cuts.
We were very, very fortunate to have maintained the ability to have the property and maintain it for this many years. It's just something, you see kids moving away from family farms and going to the cities, and they just tend to never make it back. And so small and medium-sized farms are kind of disappearing to the conglomerate farms. So it's one of those things that my dad was passionate about reopening the winery. He spent his life being an attorney and a judge. I spent my previous life in the medical field, and wine's always been a passion of mine for many years. And Dad's passion was to reopen history and to reopen the winery, and it came to fruition. So
it was Prohibition that put a temporary halt to the winery?
Correct.
And you and the family wasn't fortunate enough to kind of sell to the Catholic Church. I mean, I know a few were able to do that here in Missouri.
Yeah, primarily I know Bardenheimer's out of St. Louis. They kind of kept their doors open because of for making sacred wines, but that's about one of the only ones that I know of. There may have been a smaller one here or there, but for the most part, everybody else was shut down. And so we just made wine for the family use, and then of course feds came in and ripped your vineyards out and tore everything out and cut your barrels up and all that good stuff, and they left you just enough to make your own wine for your family use. And we have some of those original pieces of equipment in storage right now. An old open top fermenting vat and the original crusher, and then smaller items of use, bottling, corker, and all those type of things.
Now, you said the feds came in and ripped up the vines, so the family was not even able to sell grapes like other wineries?
No, there really wasn't a market in this particular area, from my understanding, from the knowledge that I was able to get from my grandfather, who grew up at the time as a kid. So what they did was, whatever the feds didn't rip out, they ripped out and converted it into farming operation. So my great-great-grandfather, Adam, he actually passed away in 1904.
Okay.
And then his son, Henry, was carrying on the winery until Prohibition hit him. And then his son carried on and grew to have one of the largest commercial farming operations in the area.
Oh.
But farming wasn't as lucrative as the wine business was.
Or it's fun.
Probably isn't that much fun.
Yeah.
Once Prohibition hit, it was pretty devastating to the family, and then they slowly had to sell off. They had amassed about 1,000 acres of property, and a lot of that was in hillsides on top of the plateaus over here, and was in grapes, and they sold grapes to other people also. And then over the years, they slowly had to sell off the properties until we had originally what the winery property is now, just about 100 acres of what was left of the 1,000.
Wow. I mean, it's amazing how, I mean, Prohibition ended, I believe, December 33, but to this day, we still, as Americans, feel the effects, whether you're talking the three-tier system or whatever it is.
Well, and I think Missouri, unfortunately for Missouri, they felt it a lot longer, or it was more devastating to the industry here because the laws in the books basically prohibiting wine production stayed until the middle 60s, you know, and so that's when you saw St. James and Stonehill and then Mount Pleasant come in to those type of years ago, but the laws in a lot of the books just
Never got repealed.
Never got repealed.
So states like California, that once it was repealed, they were able to just immediately go up and running.
Right.
Where here in Missouri, it took us another 30 years to get us up and running. And at the time of Prohibition, if I recall, we were, I think, weren't we out producing California as far as wine?
I think we were number 2 or number 3 in the country, something like that. And then what I was told years ago was that because of California's proximity to, on the other side of the Rockies, the feds, and the fact that there was so many Spanish and French missions out in California, that a lot of their vineyards were destroyed.
Oh, they
So
were historical.
And the feds didn't go out that way. I mean, we unfortunately sat too close to Kansas and Carrie Nation and the temperance movement, and so it had a severe devastating effect on Missouri. And then what I was told was that California wasn't to that degree because there was a lot more sacred wine being produced out there in California.
Okay.
Like I said, that may be folklore, I have no idea, but that's kind of the story I got from some friends in California.
I recall BV, if I, survived that way, and then I know, the Petrocellis were telling me that they survived by selling the grapes to the Italians over on the North Shore in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I was just kind of wondering if your family was able to survive by selling maybe to the Italians over in the city of St. Louis, since you're allowed to.
I know during the time the winery was in production, they sold wine to taverns through Washington and Missouri, and then also into St. Louis. They sold it bulk in wine barrels, small wine barrels.
Okay.
Our production here at the winery was not really in bottled wine. It was primarily sold in wine barrels, small, medium, and large barrels that was then shipped to St. Louis, Washington, Missouri, and some other areas. They also shipped, for a period of time, wine back to the old country. I think that was during the phylloxera epidemic over there, so they were shipping wine back over to that particular area.
No.
And then the other part of their business came from selling wine to the locals who would bring their own jugs, and then they filled them up and then they paid by the gallon.
Oh, wow.
And so, because a lot of the books that we did find have entries into them on so-and-so stopped by, they bought so many gallons and it cost them 2 bits or something along those lines. So that was their primary production was actually bulk wholesale and then whatever the locals would come by.
Okay. Can we start with a couple
Sure.
of your wines? You make 23 different wines.
Correct.
And we're just going to kind of go through maybe 6 of them.
Okay.
What's the first one that you want to show?
First up is going to be our Vidal Blanc. This is one of our mainstay wines that we use here in not only at our winery, but also primarily in the state of Missouri. It's our kind of version of the Sauvignon Blanc style. Get that hints of hay and mineral, steel mineral kind of characteristics to it.
You also get a little citrus notes with this. It's not that grapefruit bomb. If somebody wants a New Zealand kind of thing, this is not it. But
some years you'll get more of that. This particular year is actually 2017's. where we didn't have that grapefruit hit. This recently got us a gold medal in the Missouri wine competition that was held back in July.
Now, Vidal Blanc is a hybrid, correct?
Correct.
Now, a lot of people will hear things about hybrids. What is the reason that Missouri grows Norton and hybrids and not traditional vinifera such as Chardonnay, Cabernet? For the person who maybe has never been to a Missouri winery or just goes, why don't you grow it?
It comes down to probably two things: soil and then climate. Our soils tend to be very clay orientated, and a lot of the vinifera varieties just don't do well in the clay. And then I think one of the bigger factors is probably the climate. Our winters can be very severe, getting into the sub-zero ranges out here. I know out here in this area we get 15, 20 below at times. And then the summers get incredibly hot. And so that really, humidity,
rain,
disease, all that comes from there, and that really prohibits us from really doing a nice job with vinifera. There are a few places that are growing some vinifera, and they have some really good years, and then unfortunately they have a lot of bad years. So we try, I have no doubt in my mind some of the quality wineries in the state and winemakers in the state, if we were able to do vinifera, we could compete with anybody.
But I would agree with that, but also the Missouri varietals have a great quality and uniqueness to themselves. I mean, we have about 130 wineries in this state?
Correct.
Okay, and a lot of times out in retail people say, oh, I don't like Missouri wines, and I pointed out there's maybe 6 or 7 different Missouri wineries on the shelf. You have 23 wines, and you have maybe 4 to 6 in a wine set, if that.
Right.
So it's not a true sampling of what's available. It's almost like you need to go out, visit the wineries, come here, for example, and discover the hidden treasures.
We're actually very blessed in Missouri to have to be located where we are, because we do have the ability to grow grapes, and although they are French hybrids, but like you said, they give us that uniqueness, which I think helps us stand out. If the wine is made very well, it helps us stand out even in competitions, simply because they are unique and it's a different flavor than I've had judges over the years tell me, you can get 400 Chardonnays wine competition, and it's got to be an outstanding Chardonnay to really get any kind of really, really good scores and awards, whereas you can have some of these Missouri wines that are done very, very well, and their flavor components and their aroma components are just so unique that it grabs the judge's attention, and it grabs the general public's attention also. Now, if you can get them to try it.
Here's a question for you. So some of your wines have won the Jefferson Cup, quite a few actually.
Correct.
Now, for the people who don't know what the Jefferson Cup is, correct me where I'm wrong on this, but based on recall, that is a blind competition. So it's double blind. It's sample a blind. If it wins the first round, it goes to the finals in a blind competition. And then you're competing against wines from all over the United States.
Yes.
Okay, so the fact that you've had wines that win a double blind competition against wines from California and other parts of the United States should speak not only to the quality of Missouri wines, but also especially the quality of your wines.
The nice thing about the Jefferson Cup, or the uniqueness to it, is that, there's a lot of wine competitions which we compete against a lot of other wineries also, but the unique thing about the Jeff Cup, it's an invitational only competition, and it is invited by the panel from the Jefferson Cup, primarily Doug Frost, who invites you, so you're competing against the best of the best, compared to some of the other competitions where every winery in the country is allowed to enter.
To submit. And for those out there, I believe Doug Frost not only is a master sommelier, but he was ranked as one of the top 100 influential wine tasters in the United States. So for him to pick your wine for this competition says a lot about the wine.
Right, and they use premier judges that have been in this stuff, been around grapes and have been around wine and have been judges for years and years and years. And so there's when you win a Jefferson Cup or any medal in the Jefferson Cup competition, you're getting.
You've earned it.
You've earned it. You've done your due diligence.
It's like shooting a deer in southern Missouri. You've earned it.
You've earned it, exactly.
Now, what do you enjoy eating with your Vidal Blanc?
I actually like with the Vidal, I tend to like, I make a goat cheese penne pasta with some dill in it. And that's one of my favorite dishes with it. It may seem a little weird to be doing a heavier, creamy style, but it just goes so well with that dill and the goat cheese goes so well in my mind with the Vidal Blanc.
Well, it's a nice contrast. I mean, I see people get the big, oaky, buttery Chardonnay and then pair it with a tortellini with the heavy white cream sauce or some heavy cream. I'm like, that's just cream on cream. It just fills you up. There's nothing to cut through that to make you salivate, to look for that roller coaster through the meal.
One of the things you'll find with a lot of our wines is that, I guess you'd have to say, from my years of making wines and then also with our current winemaker, Michael Rouse, we both have a passion for wine and food, and our wines tend to have a little more acidity to them, which I think gives them a little bit better food quality to pair up. Like you were just describing with the heavy oaky Chardonnays, and I think when they have what I call the Aunt Jemima effect, where they're so thick and syrupy, either with sweetness or just oak and butter and smoke, that it just detracts from your ability to be able to really pair food nicely with it.
You don't taste that sense of place in something that's overly manipulated. And one of the things that I've found about your wines is that you have acidity, fruit, and then in your reds, tannin. So those are things that you need for wine to go with food and to hold up over time. And that's what's really fun about it. I mean, a lot of Americans view their wine as a cocktail. I mean, it's sad. They drink the wine, and I'm not saying it's bad or good. It's what you enjoy. They'll drink wine as a cocktail and then have a mixed drink with their meal. And because they're drinking lower acidity wines, they're missing. I think a lot of times they're missing out that wine is there to complement the food, and you need that acidity to cut through the food, make you salivate, and look forward to the next bite.
I was, and that's totally correct. I was very blessed growing up because as a small child on the property where the winery is at, my grandparents lived there before, and we were brought up as kids, being a German family. Wine was served with a meal, your evening meal. And of course, Grandpa had some for breakfast and lunch too. But we as kids in the old small juice glasses, depending on our age, got a certain amount in the glass that got more in it as you got older.
And less water.
Or no, ours was no water. It was
no water.
Straight up. But you may have only been, a thimbleful. But it was, as you got older, then it got more in there. But it was always served with a meal. And that's where I developed my sense of food and wine and love for that, because it was just part of our normal everyday or weekend type of thing. Now you get in trouble with Division of Family Services if you try to give your kid wine and try to bring him up with a great appreciation of wine and food.
To teach him it's a food item to be respected, not as a binge alcohol kind of thing.
Exactly. I mean, I was taught wine is food, and food is wine, and so that was what it is. Wine is just food,
We were talking about our grandmother and my aunt earlier this week, and kind of reminds your childhood in some way reminds me of me visiting my aunt, because I would go out and hunt in the morning or split wood for her. She'd make me the big country breakfast and her homemade wine. Now, it wasn't the grape source was wild grapes, but she still made a good wine, at least to a 16-year-old. But let me ask you, what did she pair with grape or fried squirrel, or what would you pair with squirrel?
Well, around here, when I was growing up, when Grandma had squirrel, it primarily was, we still had Norton that had been domesticated at the time and then later grown wild. So when Grandpa made wine, there was still Norton on the property that was being done. So typically you'd have some type of a Norton. There weren't too many white wines growing up. It was primarily Norton. Sometimes kind of mid-sweet, depending on the year, but it never dry like I prefer wines now. But back then, it was about mid-sweet, I would say, but it was primarily Norton. You'd have some that you'd have some wild Catawba or something along those lines. But like I said, the whites were pretty much non-existent growing up. Those I got into more in college, and especially the rosés is where I really got into rosés was in college.
What was your first food wine epiphany where you said, "Oh my God, this is absolutely incredible. This wine with this food, and this is why I love wine and food together"?
Oh boy. I don't know that there was any one particular moment. I think it was just the fact that it was how we did life, and it was part of our life that it just became the norm. And when I went to college, even when we were in high school, everybody was out sneaking beer and trying to party on the road. We're standing around swirling wine in our glasses along the road parties, which I probably shouldn't say that, but that was back in the 60s,
It was mischief, not mayhem or malice.
No, and there was no ever intent to cause problems or destroy anything. It was just everybody getting out of town and just having a place to hang out and have fun.
And rural Missouri, doing something like that, you're not so much of a big danger to a whole lot of people. You're out in a field somewhere with your friends, and what are you going to do? A lot of times you crash at somebody's place.
Well, a lot of times we used to have what they call these clubhouses, and the rule back then, even for us, was there was always somebody there to make sure that you didn't drive. If you hadn't been drinking, yeah, you could go or take somebody home. But if you'd been drinking, somebody took your keys. Some people, you didn't hit everybody sometimes, but for the most part, everybody was pretty conscious even back then. Because if you got in trouble with the cops or had a wreck, you had to answer your parents, and that wasn't a good thing.
No. Now, what about the vignettes?
Several years ago, we used to make we still do. It's still one of our most popular wines, a sweeter style vignole, which for many, many years was the way to go with vignole. And we had just this incredible vignole harvest one year. And the winemaker, Michael, talked to me and said, "Hey, Tim, you got to taste this. We really need to see if we couldn't do this dry." And from that point on, it became an automatic to make dry vignole. This particular wine just won us a double gold and best of class in the Missouri competition, which put us in the running for the best wine in the state. So very, very popular, especially now with the people who are graduating from the semi-sweets and semi-dries that are looking for something that's got a lot of flavor and just nice body and aroma and compounds. And
I like it. You get the pear. If you like Chenin Blanc or Vouvray, and you want to try a nice dry Missouri wine, this would be a very nice thing to look at. I mean,
Got the nice acidity in the background. Very good food wine. I mean, and it goes with so much. I mean, you could do simple fruit plate and do this wine, or you could do fish. You could do just about anything with this particular wine.
this would be a nice wine to go with a big country breakfast.
That's true. Been there and done that a few times.
No. Never start that early in the morning. Now, how many years have you been making this?
I'm going to say we've probably been doing the dry vignoles since about 2000. Let's see, it's 2018. Probably since about 2014, 15, something like this. For about 4 or 5 years.
Now, you mentioned your dad was a lawyer,
Mhm.
and he wanted to restart the winery. Was that a thing that he kind of started, and then you got involved, or you
We did that together. He came to me with the idea. I was in the medical field for a long time, about 30 years, and he came to me and he says, Tim, what do you think? Grandpa had passed, and because as long as Grandpa was alive, nothing was going to happen. And I think part of that was because he had lost, the family had lost so much because of Prohibition. I mean, they went from doing well and having a life to being dirt poor because of Prohibition. And so even with a large farming operation, yeah, you had a large farming operation, but at that particular point in time,
It wasn't
subsistence. Yeah, that was it.
You were getting by day to day as opposed to making a living.
Exactly. And so Grandpa just really had no interest whatsoever. But my dad is a huge history fan, and so he said, I'd really like to get this going. What do you think? And I had the fortunate pleasure of working under Dave Johnson at Stonehill on my time away from my vacation time from the medical field. And so I learned a lot of my trade, plus a lot of my chemistry background, and drinking wine over the years allowed me to get started in this, and off we went. Started our first vintage was 1990, and it's 2018, so
28 years.
28 years we've been at it.
Round two. I'd call that round two.
Yeah.
Now, here's a question. So, I've often said, what makes a family decide to come to America, land whatever seaport, cross the mountains, and then say, yep, this is where I want to settle. Is there any stories as far as what?
From what I was told, basically, my family came from an area in Bavaria where they were Bavarian winemakers and butchers within the family. And kind of fits in with wild wine life. But they, again, according to what I was told, it was kind of like a reverse feudal system where the government, you own the property, but the government told you what to do. And so what wound up happening was they were told to rip their vines out and plant something else. And they just basically said, bye, see ya. And pulled up stakes and came to America.
Wow.
And then there was a gentleman that had come in from that area, came over here and happened to, along with other families that happened to find this Missouri, this little haven, so to speak, and they, along with a bunch of people, came over here. And part of the deal was that you got the land cheap if you agreed on at least half of your property. You would put in a grape vineyards.
Wow.
And that was one of the reasons how the grape industry in Hermann basically started. Was the people came over here, whether you had an acre or 100 acres or 1,000 acres, depending on your ability to pay for the acres. I think it was like back then. I think even it was like $100 an acre, and if you had if you agreed to put in half your property in grapes, it was like $10 an acre.
Wow.
And those numbers may be off, but just as a way of giving an example. So it was behooved everybody to put grapes in. So for the most part around in this particular area, there was every hillside, every available area was growing grapes for many, many years. And growing up, I was told that there was 61 wineries in the Hermann area, Stonewall being the largest, well, in not only Missouri, but second largest in the United States, third in the world.
Yeah, they were back at one point even winning some world, competitions pre-prohibition.
Correct, and it's this area became just a huge wine growing area, and really blossomed.
Let's talk about the wine that gets me into trouble. Your rosé, rosé in general. Now, this is what varietal?
This is our Norton.
Okay.
So from a rosé standpoint, it's a little darker, but as you well know, Norton is ink black almost as soon as it comes through the crusher. I mean, it is dark.
It's still lighter than a lot of other rosés.
Again, we're processing this like a white wine, so you don't have the skin contact, which is how we do our rosés, which typically is how your rosés are done. We produce rosé material every year from Chamberson in Norton.
Okay.
And then our winemaker, Michael Rouse, goes through, gets them to a point to where we'll sit there and go in the lab and we'll taste it. And because they're totally dry, and we don't want to manipulate this wine and do this to it and fine it too much and everything else, we'll sit there and choose the best wine, whether it's Chamberson or Norton. This particular rosé that we have now is 100% Norton. The new one coming out this next year is 100% Chamberson.
So your rosé,
I take that back. It's going to be Chamberson and usually Vidal, and there is a small portion of Vidal in our Norton rosé.
okay. Now is the Vidal for like aromatics or?
It just gives it some texture and body. And like I said, a little lightens the color up a little bit to be able to, because otherwise if I poured a glass of Norton right now, that's what your rosé color would look like. It comes out really dark.
So the rosé, as far as the red varietal or the composition of it, will change from year to year, and you kind of take that approach with a lot of wines. It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's based on vintage.
Right. We don't cookie cut. The only wines that we do that are cookie cutter basically is that we have two fruit wines. One's called Jazzberry, which is a raspberry juice that we mix with a white wine base. Typically Vidal or Cayuga. And it's a formula wine that we have registered with the feds.
Okay.
And then we do Berry Black, which is a Norton and blackberry wine, which came about years ago when we had a lot of Norton that was not in good shape when it got here. And it came from a vineyard that just really wet fruit. Been in a vineyard, they had a massive tornado go through the area, knocked all the vines down broke all the posts.
Ooh.
So they had to go in with cranes and literally lift the trellises up and put in new posts, and the fruit just got wet and kind of weird. And it kind of had, I know some people like Brettanomyces, but it was pretty bad. So after using that wine and cleaning it up, we had what are we going to do with it? I mean, it was a lot. And so we decided to bring in some different juices. and concentrate and grape or fruit concentrates that were just concentrated fruits, and we came up with jazzberry and putting raspberry, or I'm sorry, berry black was with the Norton. Came up with the blackberry, and it was like blackberry changed that fruit to the point to where it was like picking fresh blackberries off the stem. You get that sweetness and the bitterness, and then the stemminess kind of all in one taste, and that's how berry black came from. Which we don't have here today, but that's kind of the story of that.
It's kind of your version of a Missouri Moscato.
Yeah,
and I tell people, if you like sweet, drink sweet. There's nothing wrong with sweet, and you're appealing to everybody with that. And I also tell people that if it wasn't for sweet wines, I couldn't pay my bills.
well, and that's true.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we found over the years is we get the same comment over and over and over again. We have a lot of people that come in here and say, well, I like dry wines. Or they'll come in and say, I like sweet wines. But they'll also come in and says, you know what, I typically don't drink sweet wines, but I like yours. I typically don't like dry wines, but I can drink yours. And I think a lot of that has to do with our winemaker and myself. We taste everything together. And now my son Parker is learning to go through that. He has a culinary degree and is a chef. And he's got flavor profiles that he learned also. Plus, he's been drinking wine since he was little.
And he also studied under Lou Rook.
Exactly.
Not a bad person to study under.
Not a bad thing at all.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know who Lou Rook is, just take a little trip out to Annie Gunn sometime, and you'll learn.
Between Lou Rook being a good friend and Glenn Margette being a good friend with the wine, the kid's been around since a little bitty boy, and he's always been around food and wine.
But you also provide food here now.
Yes, and that's his forte, and that's what he does on Saturdays on the weekends. We run a small bistro, and we're hoping to expand that. We've had a lot of projects the last couple of years, but we're hoping to expand the bistro into do more food and wine pairing type of events. Which we do some food and wine pairing dinners, small dinners at certain times of the years. March we do what goes along with our Hermann Wurstfest dinner. We do a German dinner, which has become very, very popular and sold out. Last four dinners last year sold out. So it's fun. I mean, that's what I grew up with wine, and that's what I like about wine. It's fun. I mean, it's I don't look at this. Pardon the reference, but I don't look at this as a party till you puke type of thing. I look at this as food. I look at this as fun. I look at this as enjoyment, sitting down here. And yeah, it sneaks up on you and you get a little bit tipsy. But I don't look at this as something that you do to slam and get stupid on.
No, it's not hop, skip, and puke, which I think was a game at St. Patrick's Day in Rolla.
Could have
But I tell people, I go, yeah, is there a lot of stress? Is there a lot of work involved in the wine industry? Yes. But if you're not having fun with it, you're not doing it right.
Exactly.
You're not doing it right because, I mean, you have a job where you get to go out and enjoy incredible wine, great food, interesting pairings, and it's really fun when you get to see different chefs do what their take is of what should pair with that wine.
Exactly.
And it's like, wow, you're actually, paying me to go out and do this. But more importantly, we want you to kind of come along and join us for this and try these food wine pairings. This is what it is. It's all about. Whether you come to Adam Puchta, whether it's Vine Chat or Wild Wine Life, we want you to join us and be part of this fun journey.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, you just hit on a lot of that. I mean, it's just like our rosé that we're drinking. It's so versatile. You can do barbecue. You can do Southwest. You can get into heavy meats. You can do charcuterie. You can do pastas and things like this. It is fish. It is just I was down in Florida in April, and I had a bottle of our rosé with me. And there's a newer restaurant down there, and I happen to know the chef. And he prepared probably the finest piece of, it was flounder, but it was probably the finest piece of fish I've ever eaten in my life. I mean, it was just exquisite. And I brought out our bottle. He allowed me to bring a bottle of our rosé out there and have with my dinner, and it was just absolutely perfect.
I tell people over and over that rosé is not just a summer wine, that you can drink it year-round. It's a great Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter wine. I mean, you have so many different foods at Easter and Thanksgiving that if you don't want to go from wine to wine, dry rosé or sparkling will go with the whole meal from start to finish. And that's one of the things I like about it. If you don't know what to pair with your meal, dry rosé is the easy fix.
We years ago, I was fortunate when I was in college. I dated a couple of girls who were fairly well off. Their families were well off, and their wine. They both had wine cellars in their apartments, and I grew. And they both loves rosés, and I grew. That's where my love for rosés came from. I mean, it was just stout. I loved the rosés, and so I think back in 2005 was the first time we made a rosé. And we got a gold medal in the Missouri competition with it, and was up for, or double gold, I guess it actually was. It was up for Governor's Cup. Didn't get it that year, but that was the start. And from then on, there's been more and more rosés have hit. We were the first rosé in the state of Missouri.
Now, here's something. How much do you chuckle when you hear people go, yeah, I'm really seeing rosés kind of becoming popular? It's like, now you're just kind of discovering the fact that it's been there all this time.
I think so many people, or so many people's exposure to rosé was some really poor quality bag in a box.
Yeah.
Rosés, called rosés, and from years ago that you pick up from Walmart for really inexpensive. And they're not very good. And so when they try them, and then you say, well, would you like to try rosé? Oh, I can't stand rosé. I can't stand rosé. It reminds me of blush. Well, this isn't anything like blush. And so to get them to try it is a big battle sometimes.
Yeah.
But once they find it, it's amazing their turnaround. First, sometimes it's that first sip, and they're going, I really don't like rosés. And then I said, just give it a couple of sips and try it out. And then pretty soon they're like, it's not bad.
You know, if I'm standing outside, I mean, I tell people there are certain wines that are St. Louis or Missouri wines. If I'm standing outside grilling or doing anything, I want to drink something that cools me down, that doesn't bloat me, that just, I mean, and that's what dry rosé does. And you can drink it by itself, but it goes with your meal. So, you know, I tell people you don't have to drink bush beer when you're grilling pork steaks on the carport. Try a dry rosé sometime.
And like we were talking off mic while ago, I cringe when people put ice in their wine. But believe it or not, with our particular rosé here, when you put ice cubes in this particular wine, and I'm not talking crushed ice, but some nice big ice cubes.
Like 2, 3?
Yeah, 2 or 3 ice cubes. It pops that fruit. There's this strawberry characteristic that comes out, this pineapple guava characteristic that comes out. It's there as you're sipping on it, but you put the ice cubes in there, and it just literally pops it out. And it's amazing. A lot of my wine drinking friends that really like rosé, they've all gone to putting the ice cubes in.
See, I'll have to try that because I'm getting more of a cranberry. Kind of cranberry.
Well, especially as it warms
cherry.
up a little bit. Yeah. And that's the cool thing also of how wines fluctuate with temperature. You know, the temperature will close the wine in, and it will steer you towards a particular fruit characteristic here. But as that wine warms up in your glass, all of a sudden that fruit component starts to change. And that's what people don't understand. If they're stuck with the drinking sweet, they don't really get to experience that as much. It does happen with it, especially like with Vigneault in a sweeter style. But you get into these drier wines, you get the true essence of these wines because, at one temperature they're one way, and then as they warm up in your glass, they just start to open up and just get these crazy different flavors that you might not get